It's December 31st. Snowflakes drift through the darkness, settling on rooftops and windowsills, muffling the sounds of the city. They come down thick and steady, blanketing the cobblestones, piling in drifts against doorways and garden walls. The temperature has been dropping all day, and now, as evening approaches, the air has that particular stillness that comes before the coldest nights. Behind the windows, candles are burning. Families are gathering around fireplaces, around tables heavy with food. The smell of roasting meat drifts through the streets. Goose and pork and all the richness of a holiday feast. Somewhere, church bells are ringing. Somewhere, children are laughing. Everyone who has somewhere to be is already there. But one figure remains outside. A little girl, walking through the white-covered streets. She's small, 7 or 8 years old, though hunger has made her look younger, made her arms thin and her face gaunt. She's wearing a dress that might once have been pretty, might once have belonged to someone who could afford to care for it. Now it's faded and patched, too thin for summer, hopeless against winter. She has no coat, no gloves, no scarf, and as of this afternoon, no shoes. We don't know what to call her. Hans Christian Andersen never gave her a name. She's just the little match girl, a category, a type, one of thousands of children who walked the streets of European cities in the 19th century, selling small goods for pennies. She could be any of them. She could be all of them. What we know about her comes in fragments. She had long blonde hair once, we're told, beautiful hair that curled around her neck. It's matted now, wet with melting flakes, clinging to her skin. She had a home, still does, technically. A cramped attic room where the wind whistles through gaps in the roof, where rags stuffed in the cracks do nothing to stop the drafts. She has a father who sent her out this morning with matches to sell, a father who will beat her if she comes home without coins. She had a grandmother once. The old woman is dead now, has been dead for a year. But when she was alive, she was the only person who ever loved this child, the only one who held her gently, spoke to her kindly, made her feel like she mattered. She had her mother's slippers when she left the attic this morning. They were old and worn, far too big for her feet, but they were something, a layer between her and the ice. She doesn't have them anymore. It happened hours ago, when the streets were still crowded. A carriage came racing around the corner. Horses at full gallop, wheels thundering on the cobblestones. She had to jump out of the way or be trampled. She leaped for the gutter, landed hard, scrambled to her feet. When she looked back, the slippers were gone. One had fallen in the street, disappeared under the wheels or the hooves or the churning mess of mud and ice. The other was in the hands of a boy, older than her, faster than her, already running away. He was laughing. "I'll use it as a cradle," he shouted over his shoulder, "when I have children of my own." She didn't chase him. There was no point. He was bigger, quicker, and anyway, what would she do if she caught him? She had no strength for fighting. She had barely enough strength to keep walking. So she kept walking. Barefoot now, the ice burning against her soles with every step. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe these dark stories, these tales that refuse to comfort us, these accounts of suffering that demand to be witnessed rather than forgotten, if you believe they matter, that telling them serves a purpose, that looking away is its own kind of violence, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support keeps the candle lit. It allows us to keep exploring the stories that others would rather not tell. Tonight, we enter one of the saddest tales ever written. The Little Match Girl was published in 1845, and it isn't really a fairy tale. It's an accusation. Hans Christian Andersen wrote it to force comfortable readers to confront what happens to children like this girl while they celebrate behind closed doors. The ending, her grandmother's spirit carrying her to heaven, isn't meant to comfort you. It's meant to condemn, when the only escape from poverty is death, when the only warmth a child can find is in her final hallucinations, when the only love available comes from a ghost. That's not a happy ending. That's an indictment of everyone who let it happen. We'll walk with this girl through her final hours. We'll watch the matches burn. We'll see what she sees. And we'll sit with what Andersen wanted us to feel. Not sadness, but guilt. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. To understand why she stays outside, you need to understand what waits for her if she goes back. The attic is at the top of a crooked building in one of the city's poorest quarters. The stairs leading up to it are narrow and dark, the walls stained with damp, the smell of rot and waste seeping from every corner. The room itself is barely larger than a closet, a slanted ceiling that forces you to stoop, a single window with a cracked pane stuffed with rags, a floor of bare boards with gaps between them where the wind comes through. There's no stove. There's no fireplace. In winter, the room is nearly as cold as the street outside. The only difference is the absence of wind and the illusion of shelter. A straw mattress lies in one corner, shared by the girl and her father. A broken chair sits against the wall. A wooden crate holds their few possessions. A chipped bowl, a bent spoon, a candle stub, the remnants of a loaf of bread that has to last until more money comes in. This is home. Her father was not always cruel. She has memories, distant ones, fading more each year, of a time when he smiled at her, when he lifted her onto his shoulders and walked through the market, pointing out the sights, when her mother was alive and the family had enough, or something close to enough, and the future seemed like it might hold something other than hunger. Her mother died when she was 5. Something in her father died with her. Now he drinks when he can afford it, which is more often than they can afford food. He works sometimes. Odd jobs, manual labor, whatever will pay. But the work is irregular and the pay is never enough. He sends his daughter out with matches because her small hands and sad eyes might move customers to buy. He beats her when she fails because failure feels like the only thing left in his life, and someone has to be punished for it. He beat her last week when she came home with only 3 pennies. He beat her the week before when she dropped a bundle of matches in a puddle and ruined them. His hands are heavy and his anger is quick, and she has learned to fear the sound of his voice raised in disappointment. Tonight, if she goes home with nothing, the beating will be worse than usual. It's New Year's Eve. He expected her to sell everything. He expected coins for drink, for celebration, for one night of forgetting how miserable their lives have become. She has sold nothing. She cannot go home. The arithmetic is simple, if brutal. Outside, she will be cold. She will be hungry. She will suffer through the night alone, with nothing but her matches and her thin dress and the hope that dawn will bring warmth. Inside, she will be cold and hungry and beaten. She will endure her father's fists, his shouting, his contempt. She will lie awake on the straw mattress, listening to him curse her uselessness, feeling the bruises form on her arms and back. Outside is suffering. Inside is suffering plus violence. She chooses outside. Not because she wants to die. She doesn't understand yet what's happening to her body, doesn't recognize the signs of hypothermia setting in, but because the street feels safer than her father's hands. This is the calculation that poverty forces children to make. This is what it means to have nowhere safe, no adult who protects you, no refuge from a world that hurts you no matter which direction you turn. She left the attic when the sky was still grey. Her father shook her awake before dawn, pressed the bundle of matches into her hands, and pointed toward the door. That was all the instruction she needed. She knew the routine: walk the streets, find customers, sell enough to justify her existence for another day. The matches were wrapped in paper, with loose ones tucked into her apron pocket. They were sulfur matches, the kind that flared with a scratch against any rough surface. Common and cheap, the sort of thing every household needed, but no one thought much about. A penny would buy several. A few pennies would make the difference between a beating and a meal. She stepped out into the morning. The flakes hadn't started yet, but the air was bitter, the kind of chill that finds its way through clothing and settles in the bones. She pulled her thin dress tighter, not that it helped, and began to walk. The city was waking up around her. Servants were opening shutters. Shopkeepers were sweeping their stoops. The day was beginning, and somewhere in its hours, surely, she would find someone who needed what she was selling. The woman was well dressed, a fur-trimmed coat, leather gloves, a hat with a feather. She was examining vegetables at a market stall, selecting the finest ones for her holiday table. "Please, ma'am." The girl held up her matches. "Matches for sale. Only a penny for a bundle." The woman glanced at her. Just a glance, a quick flick of the eyes that took in the bare feet, the ragged dress, the dirty face, and then looked away. She didn't speak. She didn't shake her head. She simply continued examining vegetables as if the girl hadn't spoken, as if she wasn't there at all. The girl waited for a moment, hoping for acknowledgement, for refusal, for anything. The woman selected her vegetables, paid the vendor, and walked away without ever looking back. It was as if the girl was invisible, as if she existed in a different world that occasionally overlapped with this one, but could be ignored if you tried hard enough. The bakery smelled like heaven: fresh bread, sweet rolls, cinnamon and sugar, and everything warm and good. The smell drifted out into the street, wrapping around the girl like a promise. She stood near the doorway, hoping that customers going in and out might notice her, might be moved by the contrast between the abundance inside and the poverty outside. "You, girl!" The baker emerged, red-faced and sweating despite the cold. "Get away from my door. You're driving off customers." "Please, sir, I only want to sell my matches." "Matches?" He laughed, but not kindly. "Look at you. You think anyone wants to buy from a beggar? You're making the place look bad. Move along, or I'll call the constable." She moved along. The smell of bread followed her down the street, making her empty stomach clench with want. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. A heel of stale bread, gnawed slowly to make it last. The hunger was a constant presence now, a hollow ache that never quite went away. The morning became afternoon. She walked from street to street, market to market, hoping to find a customer who needed what she was selling. The flakes began to fall around midday, light at first, then heavier, the white covering her hair and her dress and her bare feet. She kept moving, because moving was slightly warmer than standing still. No one bought anything. Some people glanced at her and looked away. Others didn't even glance. A man brushed past her so roughly that she stumbled into the gutter, and he didn't break stride or look back to see if she was hurt. A group of children pointed and laughed at her bare feet before their nursemaid hurried them along. By mid-afternoon, her feet had gone numb. That was a relief, in a way. The burning pain of ice against skin had been replaced by nothing at all. She couldn't feel her toes. She tried to wiggle them and wasn't sure if they moved. The bundle of matches in her hand was unchanged. Every single one unsold. Late in the afternoon, a man actually stopped. He was elderly, with white whiskers and a kind face, wearing a heavy wool coat and sturdy boots. He looked at the girl, really looked at her, and something like pity crossed his features. "Matches, young lady?" "Yes, sir." Hope flared in her chest. "A penny for a bundle, sir, or 3 pennies for 3. They're good matches, sir. They light every time." He was reaching into his pocket. He was going to buy. She was going to sell something finally, after hours of walking and asking and being ignored. She was going to have coins to show her father, proof that she wasn't worthless, evidence that she deserved to exist for another day. "Father!" A young woman appeared at the man's elbow, taking his arm. "We'll be late for dinner. Mother is expecting us." The man hesitated. He looked at the girl, then at his daughter, then at the girl again. "I'm sorry," he said. "I haven't any change." He let his daughter lead him away. The girl watched them go. He had been reaching into his pocket. He had been about to buy. If his daughter had arrived 30 seconds later, everything would be different. But 30 seconds was too long, and the bundle remained in her hand, full and unsold. As the light began to fade, she found herself on a street of wealthy houses. These were not the cramped tenements of her own neighborhood, not the sagging roofs and cracked walls she knew. These houses were tall and solid, built of good brick, with large windows that glowed with candlelight. Iron gates guarded small front gardens. Brass knockers gleamed on painted doors. Everything spoke of money, of security, of a world where winter was an inconvenience rather than a death sentence. Through the windows, she could see glimpses of another existence entirely. A parlor with velvet furniture and paintings on the walls. A dining room where a table was set for 12, crystal glasses catching the light. A sitting room where a fire blazed in an enormous hearth, its flames dancing, its heat radiating into every corner of the room. She could almost feel that warmth through the glass. Almost. In one window, she saw a Christmas tree. It reached nearly to the ceiling, decorated with candles and glass ornaments and strings of gold beads. A family was gathered around it. Parents and children, grandparents, a baby in someone's arms. They were laughing at something the youngest child had said. The mother reached out to adjust an ornament. The father lifted a toddler to see the star at the top. They looked happy. They looked like they had never known a moment of want in their lives. She stood watching until her feet ached with standing, until her hands shook too badly to hold the matches steady. Then she made herself turn away. The night was coming, and she still had nowhere to go. The bells of the church rang 6 times. Somewhere in the city, families were sitting down to their New Year's Eve dinners. The smells reached her even in the empty street. Roasting meat, baking bread, spices and sweetness and everything rich. Her stomach cramped with hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday? The day before? The flakes fell harder now, thick and heavy, obscuring the lamplights and muffling every sound. The temperature was dropping further. She could feel it even through her numbness. A deeper chill settling in, the kind that kills. She needed to find shelter. Not home. She couldn't face what waited there. But somewhere. A doorway. An alley. Anywhere out of the wind. She turned down a narrow lane, her bare feet leaving prints in the fresh white covering. At the end of the lane, she found a corner where two houses jutted out, their walls creating a small protected space. Not enclosed, not warm, but at least sheltered from the gusts that had been cutting through her all day. She sank down against the wall and pulled her legs up under her dress. This would have to do. The corner was marginally better than the open street. The walls blocked the wind from two directions, and the overhang of the roof above kept the worst of the flakes from falling directly on her. She pressed her back against the brick, feeling its chill through her thin dress, and tried to make herself as small as possible. Her feet were completely numb now. She looked at them, pale, almost blue. The toes motionless when she tried to move them. She should probably be frightened by that. She was too exhausted to feel much of anything. The matches sat in her lap. The bundle was still full. She hadn't sold a single one all day. The loose ones in her apron pocket pressed against her leg. So many matches, so useless now. She curled her fingers around the bundle, feeling the rough paper, the wooden sticks inside. Her hands were shaking, her whole body was shaking. Violent tremors that she couldn't control, her muscles trying desperately to generate heat. From far away, she could hear sounds of celebration, laughter, music, the clink of glasses raised in toasts. New Year's Eve was happening without her. She thought about her grandmother. The old woman had died in the spring, when the flowers were beginning to bloom in the gardens of the wealthy. She had been sick for a long time before that, coughing, growing thinner, fading like a candle burning down to nothing. But even in those final weeks, she had always smiled when she saw her granddaughter, always found the strength to hold her close. "You are precious," she used to say. "Never forget that. Whatever happens, you are precious to me and to God." She had talked about heaven in those last days, a place with no hunger, no pain, no cruelty, a place where the ones who suffered on earth would find rest, a place where they would see each other again, someday, when God called them home. The girl had believed every word. Her grandmother was the only person who had never lied to her, never disappointed her, never raised a hand against her. If she said heaven was real, then it was real. She wondered what her grandmother would say if she could see her now. Huddled in an alley on the coldest night of the year, alone and hungry and slowly freezing to death. She probably wouldn't say anything. She would just open her arms. She looked at the matches in her lap. She knew she wasn't supposed to use them. Every match she struck was money lost, product wasted, another reason for her father to be angry. The matches were for selling, not for burning. That was the rule. But her hands were so cold. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore. And what difference would one match make? She hadn't sold any. Her father would be furious regardless. One match wouldn't change that. One match wouldn't save her. But one match might warm her, if only for a moment. A few seconds of heat, a small light against the darkness that was pressing in from every direction. She pulled a single match from the bundle. She hesitated. The match was small between her stiff fingers. A stick of wood with a bit of sulfur on the end, worth almost nothing, worth everything to the right customer, on the right day, worth nothing at all to her now, except for the heat it could produce. She thought about what her father would say. She thought about the beating she would receive if she went home, the night that stretched ahead of her if she stayed. She thought about the celebration happening in the houses around her, the warmth, the food, the love, all the things she could hear and smell, but never touch. She thought about her grandmother's arms, the match scraped against the brick wall, the sulfur caught. A tiny flame bloomed in her hands, casting a circle of golden light. And something impossible began. The flame danced in her cupped hands, and the alley disappeared. In its place stood a great iron stove, enormous, gleaming, the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It was made of polished black metal with brass fittings that caught the light like gold. Ornate patterns decorated its sides, vines and flowers and birds cast in relief. Its door stood open, revealing a fire burning inside, logs crackling and popping, embers glowing orange and red. Heat radiated from it in waves. She could feel it on her face, on her hands, on her feet that had been numb for hours. Real heat, the kind she hadn't experienced in months, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes you forget that you were ever cold. She stretched her feet toward the stove's base, feeling the numbness retreat, feeling sensation return to her toes. This was what it meant to be safe. This was what the people in those houses felt every night. This comfort, this ease, this freedom from the fear of freezing. She had glimpsed it through their windows. Now she was inside it, wrapped in it, part of it. She wanted to stay here forever. She wanted to curl up beside this beautiful stove and sleep, warm and safe, while the world outside did whatever it wanted without her. The match burned down to her fingertips. She felt the sting of the flame against her skin and dropped the spent stick. Instantly, the stove vanished. The heat vanished. The comfort vanished. She was back in the corner, back in the cold, back in the endless night. The wall in front of her was just a wall again, brick and mortar crusted with ice. The fire was gone. The feeling of safety was gone. She was colder than before, if that was possible. The brief vision of warmth made the reality feel sharper, more brutal. Her eyes fell to the bundle resting against her legs. There were so many of them, more than she could count. Each one a tiny promise of light, of heat, of escape from this corner where she was slowly dying. Each one a few seconds of something other than this creeping chill. She shouldn't light another. She knew that. Her fingers found another stick and drew it out. The sulfur flared, the flame caught, and the wall in front of her became transparent. Not gone, she could still see its outline, could still feel the brick behind her back. But thin somehow, like a veil. She could see through it into the room beyond. A dining room. Grander than anything she had ever entered. Grander than the glimpses she'd caught through windows earlier in the day. The table was covered with white linen that gleamed like fresh fallen snow. Fine china plates edged in gold sat at each place setting, with crystal glasses that sparkled in the candlelight. Silver cutlery flanked each plate, knives and forks and spoons of every size, more utensils than she knew the purpose of. And in the center of the table, on a massive silver platter, sat a roast goose. It was golden brown, glistening with fat, stuffed with apples and prunes that spilled from its cavity. Steam rose from it in wisps, carrying a smell so rich, so overwhelming, that her empty stomach clenched with desperate hunger. She stared at it. She couldn't look away. And then, impossibly, the goose moved. It shifted on the platter. Its wings, which had been pressed flat against its sides, spread slightly. Its neck, which had been tucked in preparation for carving, began to rise. It seemed to gather itself, to find its balance on the silver tray. The knife and fork were still stuck in its back, absurdly, impossibly, still protruding from its golden skin. But it didn't seem to mind. It stood on the platter, turned toward her, and began to waddle forward, off the platter, across the white tablecloth, leaving a trail of grease behind it. Past the fine china and the crystal glasses, past the candelabra with its tapered candles, past all the beautiful things that belonged to someone else's celebration. It was coming to her. Food was finally coming to her. After all the hunger, after all the days of eating nothing or scraps or crumbs, a feast was walking across the table to reach her. She stretched out her hands to receive it, to welcome this impossible gift. The flame went out. The goose vanished. The table vanished. The dining room and all its impossible richness dissolved into darkness, leaving only the wall, the white-covered ground, the bitter night. Her hands were still stretched out before her, reaching for something that no longer existed. Her stomach ached with a hunger more intense than before. The vision of food had sharpened her appetite, the way the vision of heat had sharpened her awareness of the cold. She was starving. She was freezing. She was alone in the dark, but she had more matches. She struck another against the wall. This time, she found herself sitting beneath a Christmas tree. It was enormous, taller than any tree she had ever seen, taller than the ceilings of any room she had ever entered. Its trunk was thick and strong, its branches spreading wide in every direction, laden with ornaments and treasures beyond counting. Candles flickered among the needles, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each flame steady and bright, each one casting its own small circle of golden light. The effect was dazzling, overwhelming, like looking at a constellation that had descended from heaven and taken root in the earth. Glass balls hung from every bough, red ones and gold ones and silver ones, painted with delicate patterns, catching the light and throwing it back in sparks of color. Some were shaped like pine cones, others like icicles, others like tiny houses with windows that seemed to glow from within. Ribbons wound through the branches, silk and satin, crimson and emerald and royal blue. Strings of gold beads draped from tier to tier, glittering whenever she moved her head. Carved wooden angels hung at intervals, their painted faces serene, their gilded wings outstretched. At the very top, higher than she could have reached even standing on a chair, a star glittered with what looked like real diamonds. Beneath the tree, presents were piled in drifts. Boxes wrapped in colored paper, red and green and silver, tied with silk ribbons, tagged with names she couldn't read. Dolls with porcelain faces and silk dresses, their painted eyes staring up at the branches above them. Drums painted in bright reds and blues, with real drumsticks tied to their sides. Wooden horses with real horsehair manes and tails mounted on rockers or wheels. Picture books with gilded covers and beautiful illustrations inside. She caught glimpses of castles and dragons and princesses and all the things that existed in stories and nowhere else. Tin soldiers standing at attention in neat rows, their uniforms bright, their rifles at the ready. Music boxes with delicate mechanisms that would play when opened. All the gifts that children in wealthy houses would find in the morning. All the joy that would be theirs. She had never had a Christmas present, not once in her entire life. Christmas in her house meant an extra prayer and perhaps a slightly larger piece of bread, if her father was feeling generous. It meant watching through windows while other children unwrapped treasures, then going back to the attic to shiver through another winter day. But here, in this vision, all the presents seemed to be waiting for her. Every ribbon, every bow, every carefully wrapped package, all hers, if she could only reach them. She reached toward the tree, not for the presents. She didn't dare dream of those, but for the branches themselves, for the needles, for something real that she could touch and hold. She wanted to know what it felt like to be close to something so beautiful. A single touch, one moment of contact with this miraculous thing. Her fingers stretched toward the lowest branch. The match burned out. The tree rose away from her, lifting into the sky. The candles climbed higher and higher, shrinking as they went, until she realized they weren't candles at all. They were stars. She was looking at the night sky, vast and dark and scattered with points of light. The tree was gone. The presents were gone. Only the stars remained, indifferent and eternal. As she watched, one of the stars streaked across the darkness. It drew a line of white fire from one horizon to the other, blazing for an instant and then fading. A shooting star, a dying light. Something beautiful disappearing even as she witnessed it. Her grandmother's voice came back to her, speaking across the year since her death. When a star falls, a soul is going to God. That's what the old woman used to say, pointing up at the sky on clear nights, explaining the mysteries of heaven to a child who didn't fully understand. Someone was dying, the grandmother had explained. Someone was leaving this world and rising to the next. The falling star was their spirit, making the journey. The girl watched the streak of light fade into darkness. Was someone dying tonight? New Year's Eve? Was it her? She struck another match, and there she was, her grandmother, standing before her in the golden light of the flame, as real and solid as the brick wall behind her. Not old and sick as she had been at the end, not frail and hollow-eyed as she had been in those final weeks when death was already taking her piece by piece. Young, strong, radiant. She looked the way she did in the girl's earliest memories, her cheeks full, her eyes bright with love, her smile as warm as any fire could ever be. She was wearing a clean dress, her hair neatly combed, her face unlined by suffering or age. She looked like someone who had never known a day of hardship in her life. She was glowing faintly, like the candles on the Christmas tree, like the star that had fallen across the sky. She was more beautiful than the girl remembered, more beautiful than anything in this world could be. "Grandmother," the girl whispered. The old woman smiled, that smile that had always been just for her, the only smile in her life that carried no conditions, no demands, no threat of withdrawal. "My dear child," her grandmother said. Her voice was the same, gentle, kind, full of love. "My poor dear child, you're so cold." The girl felt tears welling up. They froze on her cheeks as they fell, but she didn't care. Her grandmother was here. After a year of absence, a year of loneliness, a year of having no one who loved her, Her grandmother had come back. "I've missed you," the girl said. "I've missed you so much. Everything has been so hard since you left. Father is worse, and there's never enough to eat, and nobody wants my matches." "I know," her grandmother said. "I've been watching. I've seen everything." "Then why didn't you come? Why did you leave me alone?" The old woman's eyes filled with something that might have been sorrow. "I couldn't come before now, but I'm here now. I'm here." "Take me with you," the girl said. The words came out in a rush, desperate and certain. She knew what was coming. She had learned the pattern now. The stove, the feast, the tree, each vision more beautiful than the last, each one stolen away when the flame died. "I know you'll disappear when the match goes out. You'll vanish like everything else. Please don't leave me here. Don't leave me alone again." Her grandmother's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her expression. A decision being made, a door being opened. "I don't have to leave," she said. "Not this time." The match was burning down. The flame was approaching the girl's fingers. In seconds, it would go out, and her grandmother would dissolve into darkness like all the other visions. Unless... The girl grabbed the entire bundle of matches and struck them against the wall. Every match. All at once. 12, 2 dozen. She didn't count them. They flared into brilliant, blinding light, a bonfire in her stiff hands, a sun in the darkness of the alley. The blaze was so bright, it hurt her eyes. The heat was so intense, she could feel it even through her numbness. In that light, her grandmother became more solid than ever, more real, more present. She stepped forward, her arms opening wide, her glow intensifying until she was brighter than the matches themselves. The light seemed to come from within her now, radiating outward, filling the corner, pushing back the darkness. "Yes," her grandmother said. "Yes, my darling, come with me." She wrapped her arms around her granddaughter. The girl had forgotten what it felt like to be held. Her grandmother's arms were warm, impossibly warm, warmer than the matches, warmer than the vision of the stove, warmer than anything she had ever experienced. The warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the cold that had been building there for hours. Her shivering stopped. Her aching muscles relaxed. She pressed her face against her grandmother's shoulder and breathed in. The old woman smelled like she remembered. Like bread baking, like summer flowers, like everything safe and good. "I was so scared," the girl said, her voice muffled against her grandmother's dress. "I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't want to die alone." "You're not alone," her grandmother said. "You were never really alone. I was always watching. And now we'll be together forever." They began to rise. The girl felt herself lifted. Not physically, not in a way she could explain. Her body was still in the corner, still pressed against the brick wall. But something else was rising, something lighter than flesh, something that had been trapped inside her and was now being set free. They floated upward together, still embracing, past the rooftops with their chimneys breathing smoke into the winter sky, past the steeples and the towers, the weather vanes spinning in the wind, past the clouds and the falling flakes. The cold fell away as they climbed. The hunger fell away. The exhaustion, the pain, the fear, all of it dropped from her, like chains being released. She felt light. She felt free. She felt for the first time in her life, completely and utterly safe. The stars surrounded them. The sky opened above. Her grandmother held her close and carried her home. They entered a world without winter, light without source, warmth without fire, joy without end. The girl didn't have words for this place. Later, she wouldn't need them. It was everything the visions had promised, and infinitely more. There was no hunger here, no cold, no fear of what tomorrow might bring, because tomorrow would be exactly like today, peaceful, warm, full of love. She understood now what her grandmother had meant about God loving the poor. This was the reward. This was what waited beyond the suffering, beyond the cold nights and the empty stomach and the father's fists. This was the place where nothing could hurt her anymore. She looked at her grandmother, who smiled back at her with infinite tenderness. "You never have to go back," the old woman said. "You never have to suffer again." The matches had burned out, somewhere far below, but it didn't matter now. Nothing down there mattered anymore. She was home. The sun rose on January 1st, pale and indifferent. The storm had passed sometime in the night. The sky was a flat grey, the colour of old pewter, offering neither warmth nor promise. The city stirred slowly. People were sleeping late after the celebrations, nursing headaches from too much wine, picking at cold leftovers from last night's feast. The new year had arrived, carrying all the hopes and resolutions that would be forgotten by February. A woman walking to morning services noticed something in the corner between the two houses. A bundle of rags, she thought at first, refuse that had blown into the sheltered space during the storm. The city was full of such things, detritus that accumulated in corners and doorways, waiting for someone to clear it away. Then she looked closer. It was a child, a little girl, sitting with her back against the wall, her legs pulled up under her thin dress. Her skin was white, not pale, but truly white, the colour of fresh snowfall. Her lips had turned blue. Her eyes were closed. Frost glittered in her hair and on her eyelashes, catching the weak morning light. On her face was an expression of perfect peace. She was smiling. Scattered around her lay burnt matches, dozens of them, the charred sticks lying in the white covering like tiny black bones, the remains of an entire bundle, struck and consumed during the night. She was trying to keep herself warm, the woman said to the small crowd that gathered. Poor thing, she lit the matches for heat. Others nodded, murmuring agreement. Such a tragedy, such a shame. On New Year's Eve, of all nights, when everyone else was celebrating. The world could be so cruel. No one mentioned the smile. It seemed incongruous, out of place on the face of a frozen child. Why would she be smiling? What could possibly have made her happy in her final moments? They didn't know what she had seen. The iron stove with its glowing embers, radiating heat that sank into her bones. The feast with its walking goose, waddling across the table toward her outstretched hands. The Christmas tree reaching toward heaven, laden with candles and ornaments and all the gifts she had never received. The grandmother, arms open, face full of love, come at last to carry her away from the cold and the hunger and the cruelty that had been her only inheritance. They saw a tragedy, a homeless child dead in the street. They would shake their heads and cluck their tongues and return to their warm houses, their comfortable lives. They would tell the story at dinner parties. Did you hear about the match girl? And feel briefly sad before moving on to other topics. They didn't know she had flown into the sky. They didn't know she had found the only escape that this world offered her. They didn't know that in death, she had finally experienced what life had always denied her: warmth, love, belonging. Someone came to take her away eventually. She was light, so light as if all the substance had gone out of her, as if her body was just an empty shell left behind when the rest of her departed. They lifted her easily from the corner and carried her through streets that were slowly filling with people beginning their new year. A pauper's grave, probably. An unmarked plot in some overcrowded cemetery on the edge of the city. There would have been no funeral service, no mourners, no flowers laid on the earth. Her father might have cursed when he heard the news. One less pair of hands to send out selling matches, one less source of income. Or he might not have noticed at all, too drunk to register that his daughter had frozen to death while he slept. The corner between the two houses filled with fresh powder. By afternoon, you couldn't tell that anyone had died there. The city erased her as efficiently as it had ignored her. But Hans Christian Andersen wrote it down. Hans Christian Andersen published The Little Match Girl in 1845. He was 40 years old and already one of the most famous writers in Europe. His fairy tales had enchanted audiences across the continent. The Ugly Duckling, the Snow Queen, the Emperor's New Clothes, Thumbelina. He was a literary celebrity, invited to the homes of nobles and royalty, celebrated wherever he traveled. But he had not always been celebrated. He had not always traveled in fine circles. The man who wrote stories for the children of the wealthy had once been a poor child himself, desperate and hungry and invisible to the comfortable people who passed him in the street. The Little Match Girl wasn't imagination, it was memory. Andersen was born in 1805 in Odense, Denmark. His father was a shoemaker, not a prosperous one, but a man who worked with his hands and barely earned enough to keep his family fed. The family lived in a single room, cramped and cold, the father's workbench taking up most of the space. There was never quite enough money, never quite enough food, never quite enough of anything. His father died when Hans was 11. Something broke in the family after that. His mother, Anne-Marie, had to take in laundry to survive. She drank to escape her circumstances. Eventually, she became what she had been as a child, a beggar, standing in the streets of Odense with her hand out, hoping for coins from passers-by. Hans escaped at 14, traveling alone to Copenhagen to seek his fortune. He had dreams of becoming an actor, a singer, a dancer, anything that would lift him out of the poverty that seemed determined to swallow him. Through a combination of talent, persistence, and sheer luck, he found patrons who recognized his gifts and paid for his education. He rose, he succeeded, he became famous, but he never forgot where he came from. Anna-Marie Andersdatter had been sent out to beg as a child. She told her son stories about those years, stories he would remember for the rest of his life. Walking barefoot through the streets of Odense in winter, standing outside bakeries and butcher shops, hoping someone would take pity on her. Watching wealthy families through their windows, seeing their fires and their food and their happiness, knowing that none of it was meant for her. She described the way people looked at her, the quick glance and quicker look away, the disgust in their eyes, or worse, the complete absence of recognition, as if she wasn't quite human enough to register. She described the cold that crept into her bones on the worst nights, the hunger that became a constant companion, the shame of being nothing to nobody. When Andersen wrote The Little Match Girl, he wasn't inventing a character. He was channeling his mother's voice. He was telling the story she had told him, the story of what it meant to be a poor child in a world that refused to see you. The Little Match Girl has no name because Anne-Marie had no name, not to the people who walked past her. She was just a beggar, just a nuisance, just part of the scenery that comfortable people learned to ignore. A publisher sent Andersen an illustration in 1845. It showed a poor girl selling matches on a winter street. The publisher wanted a story to accompany the image, something seasonal, something that would sell well during the holidays. Most writers would have produced something sentimental. The match girl is discovered by a wealthy family, taken in, given a warm bed, and a happy ending. The reader feels good, buys the book, forgets about real match girls shivering in real streets. Andersen wrote something different. He wrote a story where the child dies, where no one saves her, where the only escape from poverty is death, and the only warmth available comes from burning the merchandise she was supposed to sell. He wrote a story that refuses to comfort its readers, that implicates them in the tragedy, that asks them to consider their own role in a world where children freeze to death outside warm houses. The Little Match Girl isn't a fairy tale, it's an indictment. Andersen published it knowing exactly what he was doing. He wanted his comfortable readers to feel uncomfortable. He wanted them to see what their comfort cost. He wanted them to understand that while they celebrated Christmas and New Year's with their families, children like the one in his story, children like his mother had been, were dying in the streets. He gave them no escape, no reassurance, no happy ending to make the guilt go away. He gave them a body in the corner and a smile no one could explain. Modern readers sometimes miss Andersen's point entirely. They focus on the grandmother, on the flight into heaven, on the peaceful expression frozen on the girl's face. They tell children that the story is sad, but ultimately hopeful. Yes, she suffered, but she escaped to a better place. She's with her grandmother now. She's warm and loved and happy. The ending redeems the tragedy. This reading lets everyone off the hook. If heaven awaits those who suffer, then suffering isn't so terrible after all. If death is a release rather than a catastrophe, then the conditions that cause death don't urgently need to change. The story becomes a tale about endurance and faith rather than an accusation of injustice and cruelty. But Andersen wasn't offering comfort. He was offering condemnation. Read the story again. The girl's only source of warmth comes from burning matches she was supposed to sell, destroying her own livelihood to survive a few more minutes. Her only food comes in a hallucination, a roast goose that walks toward her and vanishes before she can touch it. Her only love comes from a dead woman who can embrace her only as she dies. Heaven isn't a reward in this story. It's proof of how completely the living world has failed. The story poses a question that most readers prefer to avoid. A child dies in the street. Someone is responsible. Who? Not the weather. Winter is neither cruel nor kind, merely indifferent. The temperature drops whether anyone notices or not. Nature doesn't choose its victims. Not God. If Andersen's vision is accurate, divine love awaits the girl on the other side. The grandmother comes to collect her. Heaven opens its gates. Whatever failures occurred, they weren't cosmic. Not even the father, though his violence kept her outside rather than home. He's monstrous, certainly, but he's also a product of the same poverty that kills his daughter. Desperation narrows the soul. He perpetuates the cycle, but he didn't create it. The comfortable people killed her. The woman in the fur-trimmed coat who glanced at her and looked away. The baker who chased her from his doorstep. The gentleman who was reaching into his pocket until his daughter appeared and led him away. The families gathered around their Christmas trees, their tables laden with food, their fires burning in their hearths. They killed her with indifference. They killed her by deciding, consciously or not, that her suffering wasn't their concern. that someone else would help, that nothing could really be done, that she wasn't quite real enough to demand response. Andersen set this story on New Year's Eve deliberately, a night of celebration, a night of abundance and gratitude and hope for the future, a night when families gather, when champagne corks pop, when church bells ring in the new year, and everyone makes resolutions they won't keep. The contrast is the point. While the feasts are being served, a child is starving. While the fires are blazing, a child is freezing. While the families are embracing, a child sits alone in an alley, lighting matches to see visions of warmth she will never actually experience. She dies while the bells are ringing. She dies while the toasts are being raised. She dies surrounded by celebration, included in none of it. The wealthy families in this story aren't villains. They're not actively malicious. They're simply living their lives, enjoying their holidays, loving their children. They don't see the match girl because they've learnt not to see her, because seeing her would be uncomfortable, would demand something of them, would interrupt their joy with someone else's sorrow. That learned blindness is what Andersen is writing about. Not cruelty, but indifference. Not hatred, but the simple failure to notice. Nearly 2 centuries have passed. The story still devastates. Children cry when they hear it. Adults feel guilt they can't quite name, discomfort that lingers long after the book is closed. The image of the little match girl, barefoot, shivering, reaching toward visions that dissolve when the flame dies, has become one of the most powerful symbols of childhood poverty in Western literature. Why does she persist? The 19th century produced countless stories about suffering children, orphans and waifs designed to wring tears from readers. Oliver Twist, Little Nell, Cosette. Most of them are saved. A benefactor appears. A villain is defeated. Virtue is rewarded. The narrative arc bends toward justice, and the reader is reassured that such stories have happy endings. Andersen refuses the rescue. No wealthy stranger appears at the crucial moment. No kind family takes her in. No institution intervenes. She dies, alone, unnoticed, surrounded by burnt matches that couldn't keep her warm. The story ends with her body in the street and the city going about its mourning. There is no redemption. There is no justice. There is only a dead child and a world that didn't save her. Perhaps that's why she endures, not despite the bleakness, but because of it. We recognize ourselves in the people who walked past. We see ourselves in the families gathered around their trees, celebrating while someone suffered nearby. The match girl holds up a mirror, and the reflection is uncomfortable. Andersen doesn't present the visions as hallucinations. He doesn't explain them away as the final misfirings of a dying brain, or suggest that the girl was merely imagining comfort in her last moments. He presents them as real. The stove was there. The feast was there. The grandmother truly came. This is a deliberate choice. It makes the tragedy sharper rather than softer. The visions are genuine, and the world the girl lived in refused to provide any of them. Heat existed, behind closed doors, in houses she couldn't enter. Food existed, on tables where she wasn't welcome. Love existed, but only in the form of a ghost, reaching down from another realm to offer what the living had withheld. Everything she needed was abundant in the world around her. Everything she lacked was readily available to others. The visions show us what was possible. Her death shows us what we chose instead. Think about the people who discovered her. They saw a dead child. They saw the burnt matches scattered around her. They constructed a narrative. She was trying to stay warm, poor thing. That explained everything, without explaining anything. They felt sad, perhaps. They felt pity. Then they went home. They ate their leftover goose. They warmed themselves by their fires. They got on with the business of living in a world where such things happened to children who weren't theirs. The girl was buried somewhere. The story was told a few times, then forgotten. Eventually, even the people who found her couldn't quite recall her face. That's how these things work. That's how they've always worked. A tragedy occurs in public view, and everyone agrees it's terrible, and then everyone returns to their lives because what else can you do? Andersen's answer is embedded in his story. You could have bought a match. Light a match tonight. Hold it between your fingers and watch it burn. Think about a girl who had nothing but that small flame, nothing but that brief moment of heat and light, before the darkness closed in again. Think about what she saw in the fire, all the comfort she had been denied, all the love she couldn't reach, all the life she never got to live. Think about the morning after. Think about the crowds who shook their heads and went back inside. Think about the people we step over on our way to wherever we're going. The faces we've trained ourselves not to notice. The suffering we've decided isn't our responsibility. Think about all the match girls still out there. Different names, different cities, different centuries. Same cold, same hunger, same invisibility. Andersen wrote this story in 1845 to make comfortable readers uncomfortable. He wanted them to understand that their comfort had a cost, paid by people they would never meet and never mourn. The question he asked then still echoes. What are you going to do about it? Not what should be done in the abstract, not what governments or charities or institutions ought to provide. What are you, specifically, personally, individually, going to do? She was smiling when they found her. That's the detail I keep returning to. Not the frozen body, not the burnt matches, not even the grandmother ascending into light. The smile. Andersen insists on it. She smiled because she had seen wonders. She smiled because she had been loved, finally, at the end of everything. She smiled because she was going somewhere better than this world had ever allowed her to be. But she shouldn't have had to leave this world to find it. She should have been smiling in a warm room, fed and safe, and surrounded by people who cared about her. She should have been smiling at a real Christmas tree, not a vision that vanished when the flame went out. She should have had decades of smiles ahead of her, a childhood, a youth, a life. Instead, she got a few minutes of light in an alley, and then she got heaven. Heaven shouldn't be the best we can offer. Until next time.